warm welcome to everybody. I'm Janice Gostrel-White, one of Martin Gill's colleagues at Perpetuity, and I'll be chairing today's session while Martin's on holiday in Madeira. Today I'm told it's the 140th Thought Leadership webinar, and today's topic is responding to aggressive people. So if you've seen one of these webinars before, then you're very welcome to be returning to us. And as Martin would say, if you've not seen one before, then where have you been? We've actually been here twice a week on a Tuesday and a Thursday since the beginning of lockdown. And now we're starting to come out of the pandemic. We're going to be here at least once a week, usually on a Thursday, examining a topic of central interest to the prevention of crime. And the idea of these thought leadership webinars is that we critique today in order to get a better type of prevention for tomorrow. Our intention is not to try and solve all the world's issues in one day. More, we're trying to encourage new thinking, new ideas, and to debate what's going on, to put forward a perspective for change. And a copy of this webinar will be put on our website, on our OSPA's website, on the recap part, so it can be referred to in the future. And that will be there tomorrow morning with a write-up of this session. Now, turning to today's webinar then, as we know, the security sector is at the forefront of interactions with the public, and at a time when there is international anxiety and the risks that need to be managed. We've heard in previous webinars how the pandemic has been seen abuse against frontline workers rise in some areas and take different forms, from coughing over security people to more blatant physical and violent attacks. So what can we learn for the broader trends about aggression, both in the changing work environment from insiders and also from the public? Therefore, in this webinar, I hope we're going to cover what are the main causes and triggers of aggression, and what has there been in the pandemic, what's there been experiences there, what are the main lessons we can learn from this and how they can be acted upon, and what might we expect in the future, and where do we look to for potential solutions. And so today we're going to hear from three experts, all who have immense experience in this area through various ways. And we therefore look forward to what they're going to tell us about dealing with aggressive behaviour. So without further ado, what I'm going to do in a second is invite our individual panellists to introduce themselves. And once they've done that, I'll ask them to make their opening statements. That's 3 minutes when they get to say whatever they want to on this topic. After that, we'll ask you, the audience, to ask your questions. So can I encourage you all to use the question and answer button at the bottom of the screen? Please try and get your questions in as early as possible, and I'll endeavour to include as many as I can in the ensuing discussions. So without further delay, let's go and meet our panel. Let's first go to Bill. Bill, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Janice. Great to be on this webinar. Bill Fox, Chairman of MABO, Conflict Management Specialists, and as the name suggests, all we do really is look at the causes of violence and aggression and help organisations better understand and reduce those, and help their staff develop the skills to manage the challenging situations they can face in their roles. And we're really fortunate because we're able to work across all sectors, and in many of those sectors with the security functions, and they all have their different experiences and challenges, some of that really does translate internationally as well. You know, just like we've had with COVID, very much shared problems there and triggers. So yeah, really looking forward to be part of this and to get in some debate.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill. And now, Judy, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, once again, my name is Chidi. I am a security expert, peace and conflict resolution manager. I come from Nigeria in Africa. What we are looking at today is responding to aggressive people. I think it has to do with security. Aggressive people are not secured if you look at them, because if you're really secured, automatically you will not be aggressive as much. Even if you are under tension, under pressure, you will be able to control yourself. You will be able to withstand the pressure. But if you are secured, or if you really know what you are doing, or you are not pressured, automatically you will be able to address such a situation, especially this pandemic period. It has not been easy because pandemic has meant a lot of problems for people. But as a security expert, we're able to advise people, we're able to contribute to the society on how to address or respond to aggressive people, or communicate.
Okay, thank you, Chidi. We'll return back to you to hear in more detail in a moment. We're just still doing introductions at the moment. So I'll just go on to Asha. Asha, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everyone. So I just want to say that I am not an academic and I don't own a company, but I became an expert and ended up creating the Community Triggers Act and doing other work with the government purely because I was involved in a horrendous hate campaign. Ended up being violently assaulted and had over 180 incidents against me in 6 years. Through my journey, I realised that the police were totally incompetent, the government didn't know what they were doing, and I basically had to become an expert in antisocial behaviour to sort the whole estate out, which I did. And crime reduced by 36% in 6 months. David Cameron gave the estate £1 million. So I know how the perpetrators behave, I know their motivators, but I also know how bad things are and the tools that are not being used. So I come from a different point of view where I didn't want to become an expert. I didn't want this, but I was forced into it because people just weren't understanding what was happening in communities.
Okay, thank you, Asha. Can I just remind you before we'll return in the same order for each of the panelists to give their individual statements. Can I just remind you, please do use your question and answer button. We already got a number of questions coming in, so make sure if you get them in early, I can include as many as possible. So I'm not going to go to each panelist in turn for them to give their 3-minute statement. So I'm going back to Bill. Bill, can we please hear your 3-minute statement?
Yeah, thanks, Janice. Look, violence and aggression has been a growing problem over a number of years, and I think we've had a very strange time, as we know, and it's brought its own challenges over the last 18 months. And I think just touching on that from a COVID conflict point of view, I think, as was mentioned earlier, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. And that's in our workforce as well as with the people that they interact with and engage. And I think it's worth just touching on how the different sectors have experienced COVID. So probably a big difference is those that have been locked down for substantive part and those that have remained open. So the experience, for example, of hospitals and healthcare, in some of the retail environments and transport environments, where there's been quite a long haul here in dealing with conflict arising through educating people as to restrictions, trying to enforce restrictions that are for everyone's safety, has been a real conflict flashpoint. It's been really tough. The hospitals have had a bizarre time in the security functions in-house and where they're contracted. They've had been quiet at points, as numbers have gone down, but at the same time they've been interacting with families who are not able to see their loved ones, perhaps potentially in their last days. So really tough places to work throughout there, and those that have been involved in vaccination centres and everything. I think in retail, we've seen a real shift. I've been at a retail conference, the Oris conference, the last 2 days, and it's, personal safety of workers in retail is a massive concern there. And I know it's a very personal one for you, Asha, and it's great to have the voice of lived experience actually present. There's the violence and aggression is a massive issue. And in retail, a lot of that has obviously been around restrictions. But it's interesting how that's almost changed the security role to one of, almost a health and safety role to some extent, Whereas in the nighttime in transport, we've had challenges, of course, and you know, in the nighttime economy and events, it's been a different place, a very strange place, and people have been out of work. And of course, we've lost a massive amount of an experienced workforce, and whether we'll get them back, I don't know. And you know, so it's been different, but it's presented different challenges coming out of COVID, hopefully. And I think then it'd be great just to mention that we've got a real issue here with the, you know, and not to say it's a good thing or a bad thing, I've no view on that. I'm not a security expert. But when we look at the widening role of the security operative, the security function now, including into territory that was previously policing, we're going to see more exposure to violence for security operatives. And I think we really need to understand what those risks are, and we need to make sure our colleagues are trained, equipped, and operate in adequate numbers to be able to carry out those tasks safely. So I think there's a real issue there we're coming up to now about just, you know, we're asking a lot of our colleagues, and are we giving them the tools and support that they need? And in fact, is there clarity as to the role we expect them to form, which I'm afraid there isn't a lot of the time. We just extend the scope of the role and we let them get on with it. So, you know, it'd be great to kind of touch on some of those issues during this session.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill, and that was very interesting. And as I say, I'm sure we'll be returning to many of those issues that you've raised there throughout the webinar. Okay, might I now return to Chidi? Sorry if there's been some confusion about your statement, Chidi. Would you like to give us your sort of 3-minute statement on this topic now then, please?
Yes, based on the topic presented before everybody right now, responding to aggressive people, the security implications or the implication for the security sector. Aggressive people, as I said earlier on, generally, I think it affects everybody, irrespective of your sector. Wherever you are tensed, you are pressured. The aggressiveness will always come out. That is the outcome of the stress, the pressure, as I said earlier on. When somebody is stressed or when somebody is tense, automatically the person, if unable to control himself, will always be aggressive. But in the security sector, I think they have a major role to play because they are always the frontliners. You see security operatives or security personnel wherever you go. You go to transport sector, as my colleague said earlier on, you see them in the transport sector. You go to oil sector, you see them. You go to health sector, which has been the front line for the past 18 months or thereabouts, based on this global pandemic, which is COVID-19. It has been a challenging period before the health sector. And the health sector cannot do without security. Security are always the frontliners. We have the health personnel, but you can't assess most of the health sector without seeing the security operatives. They are the people that to grant you access. They are the people that to direct you in case if you don't really know what you are doing or what you are or where you are going to. When they are there, automatically sometimes they have contact, physical contact, or even if they cannot have that physical contact, as you are coming in, there are some droplets, there are some things people who are coming in might drop along the line, or while walking down, while on patrol, while within the premises, automatically they might got in touch or contact with them. So that's why you see security personnel are always at the front line. Then in the oil sector, most of the oil companies, they have a great number of personnel, because when you get to there, that is where you see a high professionalism. Most of them are not good in health aspects, but they are there to be guided by the health personnel in conjunction with the security personnel. So most at times you see the security men being able to communicate with them, being able to address or direct them to further their issues or their problems to be solved. That is why security plays a very important role in this very topic we are on now.
Okay, thank you very much, Chidi, and so we'll be returning to those issues as well later in the discussion. And now, as Asha outlined, she comes from a slightly different perspective than the other two speakers so far. So Asha, if I can ask you to give your sort of 3-minute statement on this topic and tell your story.
Right, okay, well, my main thing that I've always learned throughout everything was just how chaotic the whole system is with people understanding evidence collection. If you don't get the evidence for prosecution and the evidence is not good enough, the CPS will not take that case forward. So straight away, these perpetrators are going to keep committing more and more crime as they realise, in what happened in our case, they can get away with it more and more. So simple things like the CCTV cameras not being at the right angle, not the right lighting, people not recording the actual incident properly, and also things like not profiling the offenders, the people who come in and actually do these crimes. So what I found is that in the UK, and it seems to be increasing, is that there does seem to be a very lax attitude to crime. We're always talking about it. I've been talking about it for the last 10 years. So if ministers, nothing is getting done. And it just seems to go round and round in circles where the police blame the government. So the government say, oh, but we give you pots of money. The police say they're under-resourced and they can't do it. They can do their job, but most of the time they don't want to because they don't get the evidence good enough for prosecution. So that is now down to these businesses to make sure they understand how to get that evidence. If they are finding they are still getting loads and loads of trouble, there's so much that they can do, which they're not even understanding. They can activate the Community Triggers Act. The police have covert cameras they can put in. There are injunctions. There are so much that people can do, but they're just not doing it because it's just not widely understood. Even government ministers didn't understand the tools that were available to the police. So there's that point of view. And I think also what's happened is as these perpetrators become more and more confident, it goes through them like a dose of salts. They tell their mates it's easy to steal. I've personally been in shops where I've seen people steal and the shop assistant has literally just blanked them. And I've said, they're stealing. And she's like, well, yeah, they do it the whole time. I said, well, call the police. She said, they don't do anything. So in the mindset of these perpetrators, what is going to happen is they go to their mates, oh, go down such and such, steal this, nick that. So that's one big point of view. The other thing as well, which I think is happening as a society, is that these people, nurses, shop assistants, bus conductors, they're being dehumanized. So the perpetrators are tending to see them as part of the company. They don't see them as people who have got feelings, who are doing this as a job. They just look at them as if they're nothing. And that is, again, my experience that I've seen that has happened, is that when you actually confronted these perpetrators and they see you're a real person, they're actually quite horrified at what they've done to you. So there needs to be a shift in how we look at perpetrators. We understand their behaviours. These people are very troubled people with a lot of issues, low self-esteem. They've also got a bit of an attitude where they think they can take what they want, they can do what they want. And again, if there's no punishment, they're going to continue, and as we see at the moment, it's gone tenfold, it's gone ballistic. And what I get fed up with is everyone passing the blame to someone else. The shopkeepers say it's the police's job, the police say it's the government's job. Government can't interfere with the police because the police are they're operationally independent, so they run their own police force as they want to. So the government, people don't realise this, the government actually have very little control over the local police force. And I've seen that because we had, you know, a serious case review done and the actual Home Office couldn't implement their own report. So there are so many issues here, but it is just a general attitude we have to crime in the UK that it's acceptable. You go to other countries, they don't accept crime the way we do. They see it as horrific. But we just now become blasé. Yeah, someone's nicked this, someone's done that. And it really does make me angry because these are people's lives. They are damaging people's business. They are damaging victims. They're causing mental health, maybe suicide. They're causing a heap of problems. And these people need to be stopped. But we won't stop them unless we get the evidence to convict them. So I'm on my high horse, but it's me really, really angry.
Okay, thank you, Asha. And I say raise a number of interesting issues there. And I say we will come back to those. Can I just remind you, if you want to ask any questions, although I say this very reluctantly because we have got a lot in at the moment, could you please submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. I think some of us also, Chidi, have been struggling to hear you. Is it possible that you're able to turn your volume up a little bit at your end? Chidi?
Yes.
We need to turn it up quite a bit, I think. We're struggling this end to hear you. Right, so let's just sort of come back then to some of the questions that we've had. I'll come to you first, Asha, to just go back on something you said. And you said that the police, the government blamed the police blamed the government, and they were going round in circles. So in your experience, has more money been made available to actually tackle this?
Oh yeah, it has been made available, but then it's wasted because they're not actually solving the crime a lot of the time. So, you know, if you look at a lot of the evidence with the police, they'll be called out regularly, but the police actually aren't doing the convictions that are needed. So they maybe get called out, they look at the evidence, and they know that the CPS will not prosecute because you haven't got the person on camera, you haven't got a good quality image, straight away you can't get a prosecution. So my experience always came down to people not utilising those resources which were there, and the government kept throwing more and more money, but it's not going to help if people don't understand what they've got to do. And that was the thing. This, you know, you could get 100 people involved where it only took maybe 2 people. But because they didn't know what they had to do, it became more and more messy with more people coming in, and a detective come in, and CID, all these people getting involved. And it was just unnecessary. It was actually pathetic to see the amount of money being wasted for what return they were getting. And I tell you what, as soon as you started stopping these kids in their tracks and you started arresting them, boom, straight away, the crime rate went down. It went down by 36% in 6 months because they suddenly went, oh, we're not going to do that, we're going to get caught. So I know from a perspective, it does work. And then attitudes change, you know, when you do restorative justice, for example, and they meet people, you know, meet the victim, they then see it from a different point of view, and then you can change their mindset. But if we're not careful, what's going to happen is that mindset's going to keep like imploding to all their cronies and all their little yobs that they hang out with, and it just becomes worse. You know, it's not being culled, which is what needs to happen. You need to send out a really hard message, like they did in New York, where they went, boom, we're not going to accept this. You do that, you're going to be nicked. But we don't in the UK because we're also, oh, we've got to be careful what people say, what people do.
Okay, well, I'm going to say that's some of the experience in the UK. Maybe if I could come to you, Chidi, what's your experience in Nigeria? Is this kind of thing tolerated or not?
COVID-19 is somehow tolerated, especially at the long run. But at the earlier stage, it was like a scam to people in Nigeria because a lot of people, I think they've not experienced this kind of pandemic. So the thing just came as a shock. And when it came, the sensitization was not all that enough. And people never looked at it as a thing of a reality. But at the time, they start seeing kind of evidence, people who have gone because of COVID-19. At the time, they start seeing people who were once a COVID-19 patient and they recovered, and they were able to tell people their experiences. It becomes okay, this should be something that has come to be in the world. But this part of Nigeria, I think we have decided to embrace it because it's a global issue, and we cannot run away from it. That has been the experience here in Nigeria so far.
Okay, thank you, Chidi. Bill, can I come to you? We've got a question here, says, what part do you think social media video clips are playing in highlighting conflict management sort of issues? Quite topical at the moment.
Yeah, they certainly highlight them. There's pros and cons to this, isn't there? It's like anything. You know, the media debate really is that we know that what happens will be recorded. So it's a lot of pressure on for example, a frontline worker, a security operative, who is, they know what they say and they do now is going to be on somebody's telephone, and it's going to be uploaded right away. That can be actually a bit of a, you know, not only very difficult for security officers, can be a bit of a trigger for some of them in their responses. So that's for sure. We are really under scrutiny in how we as individuals behave, but also that reflects the organization we're representing. So if that security operative or worker is, you know, out the front of a well-known brand or a well-known venue or service, then clearly their actions will reflect on them. So there's whole reputation issues for organizations. Yeah, it's the other side of it is, of course, that we, you know, maybe it's one of those things that sometimes checks behavior, and sometimes we pick up really violent and inappropriate behavior. Sometimes it picks up the behavior towards the officers. It highlights just how bad that is, but also sometimes it picks up the poor behavior of the or responsive reaction of the officer. And I noticed there was another question, Janice, there about CCTV and particularly personal body-worn video.
Yes.
And I think on this subject matter, particularly for this audience, body-worn video is very relevant. And you know, when we talk about advances in terms of you know, safety and communication, and this also supports what Ash's point is about evidence, you know, that the body-worn video has proven to be in many settings over the last few years to be a really effective tool in terms of inhibiting the behavior of people we're dealing with, but also inhibiting the behavior of our officers, because they know what they say and do is also being recorded. And also, on Ash's point, it's gathering, if used well, it's gathering evidence as well that maybe can be used down the line, but hopefully more preventative than reactive, but has both benefits. So, you know, there are pros and cons to being on camera, and I think we need to make it work for us. And one point I'd say about it, Janice, is that, you know, the equipment's been issued. Organizations are investing a lot around the world in issuing body-worn camera, but they're not always given the training that goes with it. And I spend a lot of time reviewing camera and reviewing incidents for different agencies and also our clients. And you sometimes get some really poor footage, and you also get some really poor communication by staff. They've not been taught how to work with body-worn video. Again, Ash's point about how to think about the evidence, how to communicate, how to position when there's two of you, so you get a good picture of what's happening, and how to communicate in a way with the person or persons you're dealing with that in a professional way indicates that they need to be aware that they are being recorded. I don't think we do enough training around how to work with video.
That fits back in, as you said, with what earlier Asha said on sort of having tools and not using them or not being trained to use them. One issue that you raised, Asha, that I wanted to come back to you, is you said that when individuals were actually confronted, and obviously you've mentioned about this, that they don't seem to realise that the damage they sort of did. Can you perhaps expand a little bit more on that?
Yeah, because I think what happens, say for example, someone goes into a shop and they steal something, in that mindset, they just think they're just thinking about themselves, right? They're just thinking, I want this, I deserve this, I haven't got enough money, so I'll take it. Then if things escalate or things get nasty, they then become reactive. And in that mindset, they're not thinking about that person, not looking at that person like, you know, they've got kids or they're you know, whatever they're going through. But when they eventually do, often, if they are caught and there's restorative justice, when they see that person face to face, they can generally have a completely different viewpoint when they explain why they did it. You know, they were really upset that something happened and they thought they could get away with it, or they did this. And when they see that person and they see the effect it had on them, that person may say, well, look, I can't now work, you know, or I feel really scared about going, you know, to do anything, you know. But they suddenly kind of, it clicked to them that actually what I did was really nasty and really wrong. But it's their mindset at the time that kind of propels them to do that crime. They're not thinking about the person. They're not thinking about, you know, they spit on someone because they're having a bad day. And I think what happened in the pandemic was there was a lot of pressure on people, and there was a lot of build up, and there was a lot of fear. And I think some people just didn't handle that very well. And they took it out on other people. They took it out on shop staff, on nurses, on bus drivers. And that's kind of, it doesn't excuse their behavior, but when they actually meet the person who they've done the harm to, you know, 9 times out of 10 they can actually change their ways, I think. And again, I've seen that happen. You know, I've seen people who have done horrendous things to me come to my door and break down crying because they've suddenly gone, oh my God, I had no idea the impact this was having on you.
Okay, thank you. It looks like we've got a few technical problems with Chidi, so he's unfortunately left the webinar at the moment. We'll hopefully try and get him back. In the meantime, Bill, I was just looking at the last question that came through where we've been talking about sort of body armour and things, and somebody asked a question about whether we should have more CCT and audio recording facilities in public places, obviously already quite controversial within the UK. What do you think about that?
Well, as per my point really about body worn, I think, you know, as long as we introduce, absolutely, I'm not, and by the way, I don't sell it or you know, anything like that, but I think it's a, you know, body worn video, good CCTV, you know, really is a part to play. And if we can get sound involved in that, all the better. You know, things like the environments now where incidents, you know, in if you like, controlled environments, you know, an incident, a staff member can raise an incident, and the body worn video goes on, the cameras come in, and a call center comes in and says, you know, hey, you with the ginger hair, you know, behave yourself. You know, there's really good technologies out there, and we need to be using them. And a lot of organizations are using them very well. So yeah, all for that, but use them well, train people how to use them, and follow through. So yeah, I think there's other bits around equipment as well. You know, there's if we're expecting people to do roles that police officers traditionally do, well, they need to be trained and equipped for that. And you know, what we see is that we've got you know, police officers wouldn't be allowed out the station without the certain protective equipment and certain work equipment, including handcuffs. Now, I'm not recommending that's, you know, everybody does that and has that, but if you're expecting security officers and specialist roles to do what police officers were doing, well, have a look at the police risk assessments and see why they had to have that equipment for the safety of their staff and for the public they're dealing with. And I think we can't just you know, increase the scope of a role without having a proper understanding of the risks and putting in proper control measures, of which equipment is one of them. And you know, the equipment is very good now, and it really can help.
Yeah, I think that goes back to Asha's previous comment about having proper risk assessments in areas. Do you want to add anything there, Asha?
Yeah, what I'd like to say is obviously if the company or the premises feel they are out of control with the amount of incidents happening, there are powers that they can do. They can write to their MP, they can get the police involved, they can have meetings with the you know, the crime commissioner. There are special roles within the police where they have technical support units which put in covert cameras, for example. The police can advise on cameras and angles and lighting, and you know, they can do a lot if they feel that they're not able to cope with that problem. You know, they have to then escalate it to the police, and they do really have to push the police on this, because that is ultimately what the police is there for. You know, there's a lot where the police will try and deflect it back to the business, but ultimately this is crime, you know. So the business does have a responsibility to react, but if they feel it's out of control, they have to really start getting the police involved, because they do have more technical you know, equipment. They do have covert CCTV, they do have other things that they can use, and then they need to actually start catching these people, prosecuting them, and then you'll see the decline in these incidents, and you will see it if it's done robustly. But there has to be that impetus from government, shops, police. Everyone has to work together, and I think what's happening, everyone's sort of working in isolation now, and they're all blaming each other as well, which doesn't help.
And I agree with you there, because one of the comments I was going to make was, you know, this is another thing where we really need to emphasise that, you know, it's partnership working here to solve these problems. And I suppose the last 18 months has not done a lot physically for partnership relations at all. I think this is something we need to start looking at again and building back up. We just got time for a couple of more questions to each of you before we start to wrap up the session. Bill, I was interested in something you said earlier, that in a way, during the pandemic and post-pandemic, security officers in some way, although we're looking more at a modern role of a security officer, have been sort of forced back to sort of more health and safety. Do you see this as a good move, or a bit of a poor move for the security industry as a whole?
Well, do you know, I think good security officers and door supervisors, you know, on different settings, where they've been on a nightclub or in a retail environment or a hospital, they've always played, you know, perhaps it's not been valued enough, they've always played a really key role in safety. You know, they're always looking out for people, vulnerable people, and you know, I think that's really improved so much. It's improved in terms of we're so much better about identifying vulnerable people, finding support for vulnerable people. So there's always been that safety aspect, and I think the private security industry does a great job in that on the whole. So yeah, I think that it's just perhaps particularly over the pandemic, you know, it's been very much a health and safety role, and getting involved in less about intervention, if you like, and detection, and more about managing restrictions and safety.
Yeah. Okay. Final question to you, Asha. We've got a question that comments that we instill this sort of good behaviour within our children and young people, but as adults we tend to just forget about this and our behaviour. Would you agree with that or not?
No, I wouldn't really. I think there's, you know, most people would never dream of behaving like that, but there is a certain sector of people and a certain mindset that seems to be is very selfish in what they want and their attitude. And I think attitudes generally have changed. Maybe in the pandemic, like I say, some people became more selfish, or some people saw it as an opportunity. For example, if people are, you know, if shops were understaffed, they then thought, well, this is great, you know, I can nick something here, this is a lot easier. So I think, you know, as a good person, if you bring your kids up well, they should never behave like that. I think there's a parenting role that's gone massively wrong in society. And like I say, I think society as a whole, we've accepted now crime as just being normal. You know, people just go, oh yeah, I saw someone nick that, or someone did that. It's no longer seen as something shocking and awful. It's just become, like I say, weaved into our fabric of our country. Even the fact that now, as you know, that the police will not arrest anyone for shoplifting under £200. I mean, that is actually itself quite ridiculous. Because when we were kids, if you nicked something for a £5, you'd be shoved out the back and the police would be called, and you were petrified of it. But now, you know, like I say, people go, I can nick that, they're not going to do anything. So there's this whole cultural thing now which has happened, especially I think in the UK, where it's just allowed and it's fine. And the little yobs and people like that know that if I get caught, yeah, so what they're going to do, I just say it wasn't me. Most of the time the CCTV didn't catch them, so they get off with it anyway. So there's a number of things which empowers them to keep on reoffending. And that's what you've got to do. You've got to break that cycle of reoffending and understand their mindset. People are not understanding the mindset of perpetrators. They don't think like you and I would, you know, they just don't. We wouldn't dream of behaving like that, but they do. So I think there needs to be more research into actually why people are offending, what motivates them. And again, I'd like to see maybe the police doing some kind of reporting, so when they do catch these people, they can start doing, you know, analyze why did they do it, what was the motivator, and start sort of profiling in a way these offenders to understand why they're behaving the way they do.
So as I can say, I suppose it's a difficult area. The police would argue with a sort of limited resources, what are they supposed to do? But then at the same time, when it's the police and the government who are actually saying that we're not going to look into this, you know, is that the right message to be sending out from the top? We're actually normalising this kind of behaviour within society and allowing it, and that's a dangerous path to start to go down. I think also, as Bill said as well, you know, we've seen some of the very best and worst within since the pandemic. We've seen people come together. It generally has affected very much how people behave, and we've seen some really good behaviour, but we've also seen some bad behaviour as well. If I could just go back to each of the panellists for a final sentence just before we wrap up with some notices. Bill, if I could come back to you, where do you think we should go forwards in terms of tackling this issue?
Well, the fundamentals, as we've identified, you know, we've got these broader issues, societal issues. You know, the fundamentals. Often our colleagues just feel like they're firefighting, and they can't fix society's issues. And I think so. There's bigger things to address there when we look behind the problems and look behind the conflicts that we're having. I think there's clearly, and that's linked to resources and everything else, and all these problems. You know, back to influence and control. Employers, and that's employers in terms of in the context of the security industry, that's those who purchase services and those who provide services. I think really need to have honest conversations about what's expected of the role and the risks involved with that. Too often it's unclear, assignment instructions aren't clear, and the security officers are just left to deal with it. You know, the bottom line is, what are they expected to do in this foreseeable situation? Let's talk that through. Let's make it clear. Let's make sure they have the competences, equipment, support, and numbers. Of course, so that's back to a money issue. The numbers to be able to perform that task safely and professionally. I think also we need to, on top of skills, we know the cultures are really strong. Culture eats training for breakfast. We need to, I think, invest more in supervision. We talked about it for years in the security industry. There needs to be better supervision out there on the ground. People leading by example, making sure that, you know, training transfers to practice. And I think right now, and I think Ash has highlighted it well, in some sectors, really in most sectors, partnership working is key. You know, we've got to come at this intelligently. In our services, we've got to make sure we stop annoying people and creating environments where people get upset and providing bad service. And when we've got prolific problems and offenders, for example, we need to work together and target them intelligently and not leave it to our frontline colleagues in hospitals and stores to try and manage that problem. So yeah, lots to do.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Just moving on quickly then, I think we've got Chidi back with us. Chidi, can you hear us? No, maybe we've not got Chidi back then. Asha, is there anything you want to add to that very quickly? We've only got time for a few seconds.
Yeah, just to basically say it has to come down to evidence collection. If you do not get the right evidence, you will not get the convictions and you will not get the CPS take action, and therefore you will not stop that cycle of crime. So that's my big thing that I would say. There's just not enough training in companies, even like Bill said, people that have cameras often don't know how to work them, don't know about lighting. And I just think the government needs to also back shops with literally zero tolerance. And the police need to lower it, that if you're doing a crime, doesn't matter if it's £200, you will be had. You know, we need to get away from this thing that it's okay to steal up to 200 quid's worth, it's fine. This has to stop. There has to be a new zero tolerance. And we have to understand the perpetrators and why they're doing it and their mindset, because there's major reasons why these people behave the way they do. And they're not all bad people. They're people with a lot of problems that are taken out on other people and society generally.
Okay. Thank you very much, so just before we wrap up then, we just got a few notices. The nominations for the Oscars are now open in Romania, Ireland, India and New Zealand. Also got a number of events coming up as well. Book your places early for these. 4 of these are virtual events: the Australian Oscars, Norwegian Oscars Techers, and the Cyber Oscars, and hopefully our first physical event on the 24th of February next year for the UK Oscars as well. And we'll be doing this all again next Thursday, when the topic will be, why are financial crimes such a low priority and what should we do about it? We'll be looking at, even though it's been increasingly recognised that fraud is one of the most prevalent crimes, why it still remains very low on the government's agenda. We'll be looking at potential ways in which these can be pushed further up the agenda and what barriers there might exist to stop us doing this. On the 4th of November, we've got a webinar assessing the competence of security officers, what needs to change. On the 11th of November, we've got both the Norwegian Oscars, followed by a thought leadership webinar about what can we learn from security from areas that have been less affected by the pandemic, as in the case of Scandinavia. And on the 18th, thinking about security in Ireland, what have been the enablers of good security. So once again, thank you all individually for the individual and the panellists. Thank you, the audience, for your insightful questions that you've sent through, and we've had quite a lot of comments as well. I'd like to personally thank Sarah and Christine behind the scenes on the technology side. And don't forget, as I said, there'll be a copy of this webinar on the website tomorrow alongside a blog writing this up. And I hope to see you all again. And until then, as we always say, wherever you are in the world, stay safe.